welcome to the June edition of the ArtCraft Q&A, Ace Q&A for Crowfall, where we take your questions and we answer them. And this one's going to be a little different because rather than just kind of going through and grabbing the most recent kind of questions of the month, I put together a list of questions that have been kind of hanging out there forever that people want to know about. And we're going to spend a chunk of our time today talking about those, some of the harder questions. All right, so first of all, you guys saw that last week we did our official alpha announcement. We kind of actually underplayed that. I am of the opinion that the difference between pre-alpha and alpha is it's not that big of a is not that big. It's more of inside baseball, in my opinion. So we didn't do a press release. We did let some people know about it externally, like we sent emails out to some people on the press side, but we didn't do a press release or anything like that because it wasn't that big of a jump. The beta is where I think shit gets real. I think that's where it actually becomes important enough for us to really talk about it. Beta for us is we do have some of these features we need to get in, and we need to get dregs a little bit more playable. But really, beta is an event that we trigger when we start inviting in people that have registered at crowfall.com, which we're at, I don't know, somewhere between 350 and 400,000 registered players so far. And so we'll start to invite them in waves of 5 and 10,000 at a time. That's when we officially will trigger beta. And so when's that going to happen? I don't know. It's really a question of us feeling like we're there both with the new player experience and with the dregs testing. But it's not going to be that far off, frankly, because I feel like we're getting pretty close, especially with the performance gains we've already seen and the ones that are coming. So there you go. There's my what is the difference between alpha and beta and what triggers beta.
Sure. So one of our questions this month has been, what are some of the ideas you're thinking about for polishing disciplines and class balance? This question is kind of pointing towards, hey, what are you going to do for my class? But I want to answer it at a bigger global level, which is, let's just talk about class balance and discipline balance in general. We have our initial lot of disciplines in there, and we clearly know we want to make a pass at it now that we've solidified things. Like, is our formula correct? Is the 3 active powers and 1 passive power on every discipline and some stats correct? Maybe we'll shift 1 more over to passive. We don't know yet. But we are in a much better state to know those things now than we were when we made them, I want to say 2.5 years ago. Classes in the same thing. Now that we have the final class and we can look and see if everybody is actually fulfilling kind of the whole big picture. One of the things we're definitely talking about is some of the classes have a promotion line that is all about crowd control. Should we move that into something else? So those are some specifics, but in general, this is what we're going to do going forward from now until the lights go out, which is we always look at classes that are overperforming and look at those that are underperforming and ask why that is. We definitely have some kind of Easter eggy kind of combinations in there that some people just may have never figured out. Maybe we need to basically make that more obvious. And maybe sometimes there's just bugs in there that we just need to fix.
Yeah, or we thought they'd be a great Easter egg, but they don't work. It just They have figured it out. It doesn't work as intended. So so I will say that classes at this point, I feel better about where we are with classes than disciplines. I think disciplines has been kind of undernourished, right, since we put them in. So we need to go back and do that. We also have the pretty significant issue right now with melee versus ranged, and you know you've been experimenting in the background. You and Halish have been experimenting on ways to fix that. If you want to talk about the most recent experiment, I actually think that would be pretty cool because I think it has a lot of merit. Now, ultimately, that may not work. We may decide that once we put it in the player's hands that it was a failed experiment. That does happen sometimes. But if you want to talk about it, I think it was pretty cool. The demo looked great.
We're going to see, initially, we're going to prototype with 2 weapons, the dagger and the longsword, which means that this is going to be for assassins and knights. And what we're going to do is we're going to give them some more mobility. Basically, we have an input mechanic that many of you may not know about, which is you can hold your left click button down and you will auto repeat your combo cycle. Well, we've put in a way where if you hold your left click button down, we can execute a completely different power. And in this case, we're going to execute a lunge power, which is a super long distance gap closer for these characters. If they hit the target, it costs 1 dodge pip to do it. If they hit the target, they get their dodge pip refunded. So it's going to reward you a bit for being skillful and actually hitting targets with your lunges, is what we're calling these. The weapons that do this, you'll see in the tooltip that they do this, and we'll see how it works. A lot of people are very familiar with the concept of a light and a heavy hit from action games. So we're going to experiment with that on the mouse now that the input handles it. And if you tap, you'll just do your regular 1, 2, 3. And if you hold, you'll do a lunge attack.
So another thing that I think that you guys might have missed in the way Blair just explained it is this was not something added to the powers. This was something added to the weapons. And the reason for that is, as he mentioned, currently left click hold actually auto cycles through your combos 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Some people actually like that, and they would be upset for that functionality to go away. So we actually made this a weapon by weapon thing, right? Certain weapons, like if I'm using a bastard sword, that gives me the lunge. If I'm using a mace, then that gives me the cycling 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there will actually be stylistic choices that you can make based on the weapon that you select. You can decide, hey, I want one that actually gives me the lunge, or no, I don't like that. I'd prefer to have the ability to cycle these things separately.
In fact, I used, as many of you know, with our crafting system, if you add additives to certain recipes, I can actually fork the recipe and turn it into something different. And in this case, we gave rune crafters a rune that they can add to the blade mold. The blade mold now becomes a special magical blade mold. If you use that magical blade mode in the weapon, then you get the lunge weapon. If you use a regular blade mold, you just get the regular weapon. For people who don't like this mechanic at all. So,
So, and the cool thing about this tech is it actually opens up a bunch of other options as well. Is technically this is a power under the covers, so we could have a different type of rune that you add to that weapon mold that actually, when you hold left, there's a chance of triggering another power. Like I suggested to Blair, we have a vampiric short sword that when you use it, it actually chews up some resource, but it drains and gives you some health. We have the ability to do that. I could trigger chain lightning. So having proccing weapons, which is something we've always wanted, now just became available to us with the same tech that we use to get the lunges. So I love situations where we get one tech request that results in a whole bunch of new stuff that we can add in the future. That's really, really cool. Cool. Okay, so the next one is one of my questions that was on my hit list, and this one's going to be hard to answer. So here's the thing: is historically we've put off answering questions if we're like, well, we don't really have the best answer for that. And I decided that for this live stream, we would just kind of take it. Let's talk about it, because there are some things that are still challenges. We have ideas to fix them, and we're going to try those ideas out. We all don't always have the perfect solution. So the next question was, what changes are being made so that crafters have something to do in the first month of a fresh start? So this is an interesting problem that most MMOs don't see, right? Because most MMOs don't have, in addition to active leveling, they don't have a passive advancement system, which just basically gives you power over time, right? So the challenge that we've got is we've got War Tribe gear in the game, which is great for the advancement loop and also makes it to where players can play more independently. Previous iterations of the game, literally, I could hit a point in the game where if I did not have a friend who was a crafter and I couldn't find anybody to sell me a weapon, I was just stuck. Like there was literally nothing for me to do except log out of the game and log back in later. And that's obviously not something that we want in the game. So we have War Tribe loot now, right? We have randomized loot that drops. The problem is that loot is balanced, assuming that the loot should be minimally viable in a campaign. So if I go into a campaign wearing it, I'm not doing incredibly well, but at least I can be competitive, right? That was the idea. When the game first comes up, though, and nobody has any passive training, that means the crafters don't have any passive training. It means harvesters don't have any passive training. It means that players are not yet to the point where they can create stuff that is equivalent of the War Tribe gear. So the question then becomes, number one, how do we close that gap and make them more competitive? And number two, what are they supposed to do in the meantime? Like if we didn't solve this problem, is that just not a valid play style for the first month or two? What we've seen is about 2 months. Obviously, that's not ideal. So I think we should talk about, we've got a couple of vectors that we're going to use to attack this problem. So let's start with just the gap closing. Blair, can you talk about what you've done in the math? Because that's actually already in 1.15. It's just not out to the players yet.
Right. So first off, we've hit the War Tribe gear stats with a bit of a nerf bat, so it's not going to be as good. We've lowered the probability of the extremes of the really good stuff coming from that, which is going to decrease the frequency, but it's still not going to fully solve the problem. And then from the crafter skill trees, we've pulled some of the stats out of there and migrated them over to the major disciplines. And then
so effectively, real quick, so that means you've moved some of the stuff that was previously passive to being an active mechanic, because disciplines are something you actually go and get.
Right. And then some of those, basically the different quality of the major disciplines, it was on a very steep curve where most of the power was at the legendary major crafting runestone. So, some of that has been migrated back towards the common, uncommon, and rare qualities as well. So it's less, it's more linear, so that you get more of the stats earlier. It's basically what the goal is to try and give a little more stats earlier. And then we have some other things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so okay, so let's talk about that. So the other ones still fall into that category of moving it to be a little less passive and moving it to be a little bit more active. And one of those is skill tomes. So we've talked about that in the past. So the idea of a skill tome is I find a skill tome in the game and it's a consumable object. And if I use it, it is worth a certain number of minutes of passive training in a particular skill tree. So, and we actually have quality levels of these as well. So you have white versus green versus blue. So, and that determines how many minutes you get. So if I get one of those items and I use it, it's going to apply, say, 100 minutes to my crafting basics. That's really cool. That's a catch-up mechanic because I didn't have to actually wait through the real world time to get it. It's on a diminishing, the application of the minutes, though, is on a diminishing returns curve, so that a person who is already at 80% on that chart will only get 20 of those minutes. A person who's 0 on that chart will get all 100. So that means it becomes more and more, less and less valuable to a person as they go up. My goal on those was to actually make those really things that were at the lower end. Like, I don't know that we'll ever put in higher end crafting tables, but the lower end ones, I think we can give those out in the game, and we can give them relatively freely. The other thing that we talked about doing that I don't have, so skill tomes is something that is planned, like right now it's working its way through the system. We'll have to talk about how and where we give them out. I wouldn't be surprised if we give some of them in this new player experience just to get you used to the idea, and that would probably be the most basic trees. I think we could potentially give some of them out as campaign rewards, which would be really cool. That said, I have to be careful because I don't want to create a situation where the rich get richer, right? Where it's the people who win the campaigns because they got the skill tomes are more likely to win the campaigns. Though if we go with the lower ones in the diminishing return curve, it really is more of a catch-up mechanic than anything else. And then I think that over time, we eventually want to give the ability for players to basically, as a respec, offload minutes in a tree that they wish they'd never gotten into a tome that they can then sell to other players. So that becomes part of the economy loop. I think that would be really cool as well, because then it's not printing new minutes out of nowhere. Somebody actually invested in those minutes. So I think that would be really cool as well. But that's not planned for now. That's definitely a future launch thing. So that means that we will absolutely reconsider whether we like the idea, whether it makes sense, and things like that once we're further along. Do you want to talk about the crafting experiment point cap for the crafting professions?
Yeah, this one is straight off the forums, and I thought it was a good one to answer. Somebody asked, what is the crafting experimentation point cap for any crafting profession? Currently, the cap is, we soft cap at 18, and then you can raise that to 24 through cap max increasers, which we have various routes of doing that in the game. There's a potion that does it, and then there is the crafting stations that is throw imbued in the rank 3 strongholds that do it. The sources of those points in the 115 update, because I'm already in the future, right? It's funny, kind of what you guys play is in the present, but the design team is already a couple steps ahead planning stuff so that we keep stuff constantly flowing to you. So in 115, the skill trees are giving you 4 experimentation pips. The major discipline can give you up to 7. 350 strength will get you 4.75. A class C crafting station in a stronghold will get you 1. The parent crafting basics experimentation gets you another 1, and you can get up to 5 points from your equipment, which gets you a grand total of 22.75 potential crafting pips if you get absolutely everything and everything is maxed.
Okay, so now we can go on to my other hard questions, right? So the first one at the top of the list is guild banks. I want to talk about guild banks a little bit. So I told you guys we're getting into meat on this one. This is a deep dive Q&A. So I recognize that there's an issue with guild banks, right? Like, so the question people ask first is, why is this so hard? So I'm going to just take you through a little bit of the reason why it's so hard, and then I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do about it short term and what we're going to do about it long term. So the why is it so hard is because architectures add complexity to things. That's just the nature of making games. Single player games are not as complicated as multiplayer games. And so adding features in multiplayer games is harder. Multiplayer games are not as difficult architecturally as massively multiplayer games. So everything you add to an MMO is harder. A MMO that is using a shard-based approach, where a world keeps all of its players and all of its data is contained in a single database, is architecturally more simple than a game where all of the worlds allow players to move between them and push items between them and connect everything between them. That is the hardest thing you can do architecturally, right? And we do it. Our entire architecture is based on the idea that characters can freely move between worlds. We have worlds that can be brought up dynamically in the Eternal Kingdoms and brought back down. So there's all sorts of crazy rules associated with how you have locking of items. So when one person's accessing it on one world, it's locked out so that they can't log into another world at the same time and access at the same time. This is when you screw this stuff up. That's where you have stuff like item loss, item database errors, and dupe bugs. So guild banks. The reason guild banks are so hard isn't even necessarily just because you can access guild banks across world like embargo. It's because multiple people at the same time can be accessing those banks across worlds, across accounts, across the game universe. And because of that, the locking rules are much, much more complicated. So there's your quick and dirty, like, why didn't they just fix this? Just add a tab to the guild bank and you can drag stuff in and out. It's not design wise that this is hard. It's engineering wise this is really challenging. Not saying we won't do it, just explaining why we didn't hack it in over the weekend and give it to you guys, because it could be game breaking. So that said, what I can give you guys immediately while we're working on that longer term, and I know we've got to get it done, what I give you more quickly is I can give you stronghold containers, lock stronghold containers. So what does that mean? So a lock stronghold container means that in the strongholds, in the capture locations, I can have guild containers that players in my guild can open and close. They persist with that world. I can put items into them. The world goes down, world comes up, the items are still there. Players can access them in the same time. If I've got it open and Blair opens it, he can be moving stuff in and out. It's locked to the person who owns that parcel. So if I own the parcel, anybody can access it. If I don't, I don't. I actually asked for two variants of it. One that was anybody in the guild can access this container, and another version that is anybody whose guild leadership can access the container, because that's also doable. Um, Here's the weird wrinkle, and this is where half of you are going to love it and half of you are going to hate it. If I lose the location, like I've got the keep of Ganelon and I have a bunch of stuff stored in the container, and during a siege, I lose that stronghold, the new owner now has access to it and I don't anymore. And the items that were in there are now going to go to the new owner. That's just inherent to the way the system works. So when I said some people are going to hate it and some people are going to love it, I can already imagine who's going to love it and who's going to hate it. So the good news is, in the short term, this goes a long way to, oh, and this, by the way, I should have said, this will work in EKs as well. So, and so that this is I'd say an 80 or 20, 80-20 rule, maybe even a 90-10 rule, is it gives us a lot of what we need to solve the current pain point. But it is arguably, and I agree with this, it is not as good as having another tab on the guild World Bank or the account vault where I can drag things in and out. We will get that. We'll get there eventually. But for right now, putting them in the strongholds, I think will be a perfectly fine solution. It's technically within our grasp, and I think that some players are going to actually prefer it, because it means to the victors go the spoils. Let me pause real quick and ask if there are questions that I missed from the chat channel.
Okay, Grandishar asks, what happens if the bank is destroyed?
That is an excellent question. So I don't know if we'll put these inside destroyable buildings.
Yeah, we could put them just inside the keeps if we want to, because the keeps aren't.
There's a couple places that are safe, so we may put them there. I would imagine that for crafters, though, we'd want to put them near the crafting tables. Let me find out about that. And also let me know what you guys would prefer to see, because I could see that being an interesting tactic during a siege is, hey, let's take out their bank.
Yeah, so I think that Blazon kind of expanded on what Grendishar had asked and said, what happens if guild chests are destroyed? Can they be destroyed? I'm guessing no destruction, just capture.
Yeah, my guess would be no destruction, just capture, but I'll have to look into that. So I can tell you how I believe the system, if we allowed it to be taken, how the system would probably work, which is that the banking that little chest or bank object that is there is technically just a kiosk that actually gives you access to that inventory. So if the building were taken out and the chest was not available, those objects would just be lost until you rebuild the building. Once the building is rebuilt, those objects would still be there. I don't think they'd be destroyed. I might be wrong, but I'm 95% sure that that's the way that would work.
And of course, the next question is, when is this coming? Will it be in the next update?
It is currently in the TDD phase, which means they're figuring out it will not be in the next update. They're trying to figure out how to make it work, and it is being scheduled for work as we speak. But the GDD is approved, and it's off in the hands of the engineers. So I don't have an estimate on when it's going to come in. Okay, so here are some of the changes that are coming in Dreg. So first of all, the pig spawners were set up to spawn every 5 minutes, and that was just for testing. Like that was never the purpose. I also want to remind people that we provisioned the dregs for a much higher number of players than we're currently seeing. So there's a couple of things that fall out of that, right? So let's talk about glory cards, because that's actually a big one. So back to my baseline assumption, right? You've got glory, wealth, and power. All of those were supposed to be PvP activities to one degree or another. Like everything, some of them are direct PvP activities, like just go kill enemies in a siege and sacrifice their heads. Some of them, or take their town. Some of them were indirect, which was like, hey, go and collect this type of mushroom that spawns here. My assumption was the entire world being PvP focused and being dangerous, all of that was a PvP activity. So what we found in the current round of playtest is that assumption does not hold true. Like a lot of times I'm running pigs and I'm not fighting anybody, or I'm actually out and I'm able to hunt for the mushrooms and I'm not fighting anybody. That wasn't the intent. So if the intent is not working, I'm going to go back and fix it to where it does work. So I guess I want to stress that when things aren't working, I make assumptions. I mean, we're making systems up, guys, that have never been done before, right? Nobody's ever done this virtual card system. So I come up with this idea in my head or on a whiteboard and I pitch it to Blair and we talk about it and then we put it into practice. And a lot of times, I mean, even if it's functionally working, that doesn't mean it's actually doing exactly what we wanted it to.
Right.
And we're right a lot, but we're also wrong sometimes. So when we are wrong, don't just beat us up for being wrong. Give us a chance to fix it. First, I would say question our base assumption and ask us if that assumption has changed. My base assumption for the glory cards was, hey, these should be still requiring PvP. Now, maybe sometimes you should be able to do things and get away with it, but generally speaking, those are supposed to be PvP activities. All of these are supposed to be in one way or another PvP activities. So if that assumption hasn't changed, tell me where the assumption is not working, and then that gives me a chance to go and fix it. So in this one, for instance, we don't have a notification system working. So when a pig spawns in a location, it could notify every player on that world, hey, the pig spawned over here, right? If they were not as plentiful as they are now. So that was kind of a rare occurrence. And I'd love to put them on a schedule to where they spawn more in prime time and way, way less during off hours. Like if the difference between prime time peak numbers and off hour and dead of night numbers are 8x, I'd spawn 8 times more pigs during peak hours than I would in off hours, right? If I then notify the players, hey, a pig spawned at H13 in the, Brockman's Gully. Here's where the pig is. And then I also give a notification that Blair has actually tamed the pig in H13, or then Blair's escorting it home and he gets waylaid by somebody. And now Todd has tamed that pig at B5. now we're starting to get more interesting. So my goal is to have notifications when things happen. Those notifications need to come out with enough time for you to actually respond to them and get there. And then that should drive PvP. Now, that's a new round of assumptions. If I'm wrong about that and it doesn't work, then we'll take it back and we'll test the assumptions and we'll fix it. The next piece of that is the nightly activity. So we moved all of the siege schedule to being twice a week because we thought that that would lead to more nightly activity on those nights, and people were really tired of having to every single night log in and defend, right? I'm not sure that that was the right answer because before that we had some forts or keeps going off every night, which meant we had nightly activities. So we have a couple of options of things we can do here. One is we could always go back to the old schedule. That's certainly a possibility. We're considering that, where we would have some forts or keeps going off every night. Another option is to come up with other nightly activities, things that happen on off nights that are pretty much, I mean, I can never guarantee you PvP, but if we have enough players on, I can put out things that are juicy enough and notify notify you enough, right? Effectively, the siege schedule, that's what it is. It notifies you, go here at this time in this place, and you'll be highly likely to find PvP. So I need to solve that. I have a couple other ideas for things that we can do. What I would really love to do is have a buffet of different PvP activities. Like the reason I've had somebody say, hey, we'll just move back to the powers, like make it mostly power system. We can, but the problem is that's all just sieging is going to get stale. Like if I'm only fighting over forts and keeps, I think my fear is that's going to get stale. What I would really like to do is have a variety of different experiences, all of them centered around PvP, but it keeps the game fresh. It actually, there's multiple avenues. There's different tactics I can try and do. So when I log in, we're like, all right, do we want to go after the pigs that just spawned over here? That's a big deal. A relic spawned over there. That's kind of a big deal. We want to go after that. But shit, we've got this keep over here that's about to tick. We should really go and help them defend, or we should go and help these guys attack them. That's what I would like, is a variety of those activities firing every night. And then a couple times a week, you kind of have these mandatory, hey, we're being attacked. If you care enough, you need to log in and defend.
One of the things we noticed in testing was we created the concept of home base as part of the Dregs update. And we had two forms of home base. We have the keep, which is really big, and physically it takes up 4x4 grid squares. And then we have the forts, which take up 3x3 grid squares. So basically we created two forms of home base, a really big one and a smaller one. And the reason we did that is because we only have so much room in the map. And these keeps, they create a dead zone around them, so you can't put other keeps. So we need to have the smaller ones, just so we can have some variety in these maps.
And frankly, the smaller ones are also better for smaller fights. I mean, if you have a massive guild, the keep is fine, but if you have a smaller guild, that's a lot of running. It's a whole lot of running around. So I think personally that having one that's that's not tiny, but a little bit smaller, a keep that's a little smaller, that makes a lot of sense to me. A home base, excuse me,
yeah,
that's a little smaller makes a lot of sense.
And then Todd and I sat down and we went through the list, and we just noticed the variety of differences between our home bases. And our metaphor for home base was basically, it was split in two. And I said, well, we need to actually, let's consolidate all this and make the home base mean a certain number of things. There's buildings that you upgrade. There's a tree of life. It has a siege schedule. And the forts and the keeps are just too different to do that.
Yeah, so the keep serves that purpose well, but the fort really doesn't, right? The fort is kind of like a keep because it has a siege schedule, but it's also kind of like an outpost because it's got the outpost circle mechanic, but it does have so it's in between. Oh, and the walls are flimsier. It just doesn't make a great home base, right?
Right. So we'll pitch the idea of a baby keep that has the same footprint of a 3x3 cells for the smaller guilds, because we still want to have those in the map, and we need to have those smaller ones so the maps work. So we saw the layout for the new baby keep this morning, and I think it's
great. It's great.
Fantastic.
So what we basically did is we recognized that the fort was sitting at this weird intersection where it's kind of an outpost and it's kind of a keep. and we decided that the right answer was to split it. So what we need to do is move the ways in which it is a fort. It needs to just, or an outpost, it just needs to be an outpost.
Yeah.
The ways in which it needs to be a home base, it just needs to be a home base. So we're creating a new version that fits in the same footprint as that will serve as a great home base. And we're going to then take that existing fort with the lodge and stuff, and we're going to move it. We'll probably shrink it down a little bit, and we're going to move it down to where it's intended. It's an outpost, and it's intended to be an outpost.
I've only seen one person, Citando, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, actually mention this in the chat, but it's something that I see continually asked on social media and on the forums, and that is performance.
Okay. Yeah. So I feel like we made tremendous strides in our performance in the last version. Right now, I'm not saying that it's done, but I'm saying that we were seeing on the average person was getting 20 to 30 frames per second while running the game, and some people were getting like 40 or 50, like significant jumps forward. I would say that was a chunk. That was like the first round of performance fixes. We've got more that are coming. We've got more that we're working on right now. So one bug that is currently bothering us on test and live is we put in culling, object culling, which basically is, hey, if it's an object that I can't see because it's too far in the distance or whatever, it's too small, just don't try and render it, which did a great job of giving us a big performance bump. However, now it caused a weird issue where occasionally the wrong object gets culled. It's still there on the server and I get snagged on it. And that's when you'll see yourself teleport or pop in the game. We're fixing those on a one-off basis. So please, when you have that happen on live, screenshot it for us so we can fix it. We have a more generalized solution coming, though, that should improve performance and fix that problem. I don't know if it'll be the next big update or the one after that. We'll see where it falls. But there's a handful of other things that we're working on as well. I mean, performance is one of those things. I've said this for years, is you don't really start to take a look at it till you get towards the end of the project. And that's where we're at now. So we're finally starting to put a real focus on it, and we're finally starting to see real gains in that area. So I'm pleased with what we've got so far. We're not there yet, but at least it shows that I wasn't kidding. Eventually, I knew we'd get here, and I knew that when we did, we would start to see big gains, and we've started to see big gains.
Okay, before we wind things up, we have to do the war story. We have to do the war story of the week.
I'll go ahead and do those. Yeah. So war stories, for those of you who don't know, is our chance to take the mirror of our game and shine it back on you. So as you guys take videos of your activities in the game, cut them together and tag them with the hashtag war stories and put them out. And we'll pick the ones that we think are cool. And we will probably, generally speaking, we always retweet them, but we always give a little bit of extra attention to the ones that we think are the coolest. So this week's war story, you got it for us, Val?
I do. This one comes from Blaze. A little story about it. He said, we were contacted by a dissident about helping them with the siege defense. This actually gets a little bit long, so let me condense it down a little bit. So another guild had contacted the Lords of Death to help them fight against Winter Blades. That's what happened. So I think the term that Blaze used was that they were spoilers. So they were kind of acting as mercenaries. And this is something we've talked about from the beginning, that people could do in Crowfall. We've seen it before, not just with Lords of Death in this video, but we've seen other guilds do it too, where it's like, hey, I don't really have a side in here. I will go with whoever makes the deal sweeter for me. So that's exactly what Winter Blades did here. Blaze said, we expected a counterattack from Winter Blades, so we hurried back to our fort. Sure enough, they showed up and started placing siege engines to destroy our buildings. Skip a little bit. Once Dissident arrived with backup, we were able to run Winter Blades off again. Although we still fight Dissident in the open field outside of siege windows, this is a great example of politics taking shape in the dregs. Siege pacts like these are commonplace in Conquest PvP MMOs such as Shadowbane and Darkfall. So thank you very much, Blaze. Thanks for putting the little thing together. I'm sorry I had to clip a little bit of what you said, but I just thought this was a great story. I love the video. We'll include a link to it so you can see the original video. And one of the things that's important to me when I watch these is hearing the voice comms that go on. Like, you have to communicate with your teammates to be effective. And some of these are almost like military level operations. And I always love hearing that. So thanks, Blaze. And don't forget to send in your war stories. Hashtag war stories, hashtag Crowfall Games. Thanks,
Cool.
sir.
All right. I think that's probably it for this month. Are we good?
Looking at the checklist. Oh, social media. Stay up to date on all things Crowfall. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Follow us all the places.
They're down below. Follow all the places. Click the like bell. I don't know. Do all the things. There you go.
Cool. All right. I think that's it for this time. So thanks, guys, for watching. As always, thanks for your questions. Hopefully, we got more answered this time, and we will see you guys both in game, and we will see you next month. Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for coming out, everybody.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. See you guys.